Just make sure we're on here. My computer is so slow today. Okay. All right, we're live. Okay, Cliff. So thank you, Cliff and everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here on Channel 27. I'm so grateful to be speaking with the one and only Cliff Hyde from halfpasthuman.com.
It sounds like P.T. Barnum bullshit, you know?
Oh, God. Before we get started, because Cliff posted this on his Twitter, there's a lot of new people here, I'm sure. So if you're new to this channel, I'm Heidi Vandenberg. I'm a Vedic astrologer and life coach. So also I want to thank Rex for connecting us. So initially I reached out to Cliff due to my recent interest in cryptocurrency. So this year I noticed some similar patterns and specific alignments in transits and charts, and people that became very successful over cryptos. So I have been analyzing them through Vedic astrology. So I would assume everyone here knows about Cliff's work and knows who Cliff is, but I suggest you go to his site, halfpasthuman.com, subscribe to his channel. I'm going to pin all of his information below, but in my opinion, if you download his reports and get his reports, this is a game changer for astrologers or anybody that does predictions. Or so these are his reports. Make sure you go to his website. And last week, Cliff and I spoke, and I will say that not only was my mind blown, that's like an understatement, but he is a mastermind of intelligence. His intelligence is on another level. So I would say he's a walking encyclopedia, but I think he puts that to shame. And honestly, I think personally, I was so drawn to him too after our conversation, because he's what I think enlightenment is, that's what I would think of as him. So I think he's very advanced with that. So thank you, Cliff, for sharing your knowledge with us. Honored to be speaking with you. We're going to talk about multiple subjects. So I wrote down some questions from the chat, and I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you how you got on your spiritual path.
I got born on the planet. That's how it happens to all of us, you know. Okay, here's the way it is, all right? When you're born in this planet, you're reincarnated. It takes an average of 84 million lives to become a human. So you work your way up through all of these other lives, you get hung up in certain species for a while, and then eventually you become human. And then you do very badly at it, and you go through millions of lives as a human. So there's this old saying, dove comes out of a branch every year with a silk handkerchief, and it drags the silk handkerchief across the face of these cliffs in Kazakhstan. And over the time it takes, however many iterations, however many times it takes it to wear down those mountains with that silk handkerchief, that's how many lives you'll have. Okay, so it's a long process, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so here's the rule. When you're born, you have the option to decide. So you do have free will, all right? You can decide, I wish to deal with this garbage from my previous life in this life. Or no, I'm gonna party, you know? And so it's your choice, right? Well, I've wasted too much time in previous lives partying, so I had to get to work this life.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good to hear. So you do believe kind of in the Hindu reincarnation, you choose what you want, what karma you want to...
The Hindu approach, yes, I do, okay. But the Hindu approach, I think, is the most valid of any of the historical, religiously tainted understandings of the planet and what's going on here. However, it must be understood to be a remnant. It's not a complete system. So for instance, yoga is missing so much. It's missing maybe 2/3 of all of its core material. The 1/3 remnant we have left is a result of the few survivors that came out of the Great War. The Great War was a conflict between parties unknown that brought us the Sahara Desert, the Mongolian Desert, the dead band that goes from Egypt up through the Middle East, in through India and into China. So it also brought us the frozen Antarctica. So whenever that war was, whatever time period we put it in, from that point on, there were not as many survivors on the planet, and so we're left with fragmentary knowledge. We do know that there are vast quantities of Sanskrit material as yet untranslated. And so there's probably all kinds of stuff that's still hidden in Sanskrit, books that are lying about waiting to be read. I mean, many of these things are in libraries and haven't even been read in 100 or 200 years. And so we don't know what's in them even yet. And they haven't been digitized, they haven't been translated. It's a huge work. There were, I think, 400 translators involved, and they just got through the A's in this one library of Sanskrit volumes. So they got through just the A letter, and there's like 55 or 65,000 volumes left to be translated. So in there, I think we'll find a lot more. But yes, I believe the Hindu understanding is closer to reality than most of the others. But their understanding of reincarnation and all of this is tainted by the religion. And if you can get the religion out, look at it at I hate to use the word, but in a mechanistic fashion, a pragmatic fashion, reincarnation is close to the way they think about it. And it used to be described that way in Christianity before the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Of the 1,200 sects in Christianity, there were about 1,140 of them that were fierce adherents to the idea of reincarnation.
Wow. So, and if we can talk about reincarnation later a little bit, but sure. I really want to, Rex, we were on Rex's channel and we asked you the question and you explained astrology and why astrology works, and Vedic astrology in particular, the sidereal zodiac, which is what I use. I was so excited when you said that. Made me feel a lot better because, and you said not Western, the sidereal zodiac. So I'm curious to know, why you believe astrology works and why you think it's accurate, like you said on, the show and what our conversation, and why would you say the sidereal zodiac over Western?
Sidereal zodiac over Western because it more accurately reflects a non-Earth view of what's going on in our solar system. Earth, if we choose the Western view, for instance, Pluto came later. So we've been adding planets to the zodiac and to the astrology over time, and even subtracting them now. So this is not a good way to really look at this kind of a discipline. The discipline works if one knows how to deal with it, and I don't. Okay, I've never delved into it. I just have enough of an understanding to recognize that there's too much there for me to be able to grasp in this lifetime the way I would want to. And so I haven't pursued it, but I also know that it's valid. The reason I know it's valid has to do with the misunderstanding that Western science has of how the universe started. And they think there was this like initial amount of energy that we could put the letter Z to. And there was so much energy, it caused it to explode and create universe in a big bang. And we're still working off that energy as the universe is continually expanding, using up that energy of the big bang. And their understanding is that at some point the energy would run out, we would reach an entropic state and start to collapse. And that's totally false understanding of how universe works and what's going on. And it can't be used to account for so many different aspects of the reality that we can actually measure that science should have thrown it out years ago. Instead, they keep coming up with hacks and patches and kludges and workarounds to get around some of these issues. But basically, the universe started as a little bloop. And it started that way because there was a little tiny bit of energy and no space. And so energy could go in that no space infinitely, very, very, very fast. And it crossed itself so many times that it built up a level of complexity. And from that complexity came the very first hydrogen ion. When that hydrogen ion came into existence, just merely by dense layers of energy just becoming packed together, it brought with it the very first instance of both space and time. And instantly thereafter, I mean, in a no time kind of a duration, another hydrogen atom came into being because the energy never stops. It keeps crossing itself and recrossing itself continuously. Now it destroys itself every other cycle, so that it goes 22 trillion times a second. The energy, the pulse, it's called, the unknown or the silent pulse or the void pulse, comes 22 trillion times a second. And the void is created 22 trillion times a second as the pulse is stopped and everything ceases to exist. This is what allows us this sensation of motion. because our minds don't work at a very fast level, we can't see that happening. And so we think that we are solid, we think that the desks are solid, cars are solid, etc. And it's just tricking our senses. If we could see it 22 trillion times a second, we would see the universe flashing on and off and destroying itself. Of course, we couldn't see it destroying itself because we would also be destroyed, right? So, but it doesn't alter consciousness. That pulse in no way affects our consciousness. So we are there continuously as ourselves from creation to destruction to creation to destruction, 22 trillion times a second for the entirety of our lives. Because universe is energy and there is no such thing as solidity, and solidity is only an abstraction in our mind. If we look at the universe that way, and we also look at the idea that it's continually creating new matter, as the pulse gets more and more complex, the nature of the matter gets complex. And so initially it was only creating hydrogen atoms. Now it's creating, element 199, element 234, and so on. This kind of thing is just getting more and more complex as the energy overlaps itself. Now the pulse can recreate universe 22 trillion times a second in its entirety. So it moves outside of time. Time only exists, therefore, within universe. And so the issue of time and astrology and accuracy, etc., has to do with that energy being disturbed by the level of complexity that it has to create. And so it's kind of a funny way to think about it, but the energy actually goes faster when it's creating what we think of and perceive as matter than when it's creating what we think of as the void. And as a result of this, there's a vibration within universe that is susceptible to every other vibration within universe, the way that if everybody were throwing stones into a pond at the same time, you'd get this very complex mishmash of energies. And if you threw in a big stone, your waves would tend to dampen and cause other waves to flatten out. Maybe they would harmonize with them and exaggerate them, and so on. And so that's the analogy. That's the way to think of the impact of astrology on our lives, because we're sitting there as antennae, receiving all of these energies continuously. Every single 22 trillion times a second of our lives, we're getting these energies again, and we're subject to those ripples, those magnifications, those dampenings, the permutations, everything that comes from all the other energy within universe. Now, admittedly, Alpha Centauri is not causing me much of a problem at the moment, right? But Mars is a lot closer, and Mars is going to cause me more of a problem because it's going to have more of an effect on my personal energy ripples, if you will. And so that's why astrology works. And if one mass of energy was in front of another, if one was occluding another, eclipsing another, you're going to get an entirely different combination of those levels of complexity running into themselves. And thus I can say with an absolute fact that all energy within universe is affected by all other energy. Ergo, the planets, the stars, all of these things are affecting my energy at a level that I might or might not be able to perceive. And that's really the issue, is my mind, not the actual reality that's going on. So you have a lot of people that don't believe in astrology, can't see it as happening or being useful, and they're sort of missing out. But that's their mind, that's the barrier, not the reality.
Right.
Now, sidereal is better simply because it's more mechanistically accurate. But if you want to really get serious about Vedic astrology, you've got to read Dr. Bhatt, B-H-A-T. He was a Hindu mathematician in 1940s, and he came up with what we call the helical model of the solar system. So for instance, Earth has never, ever, ever orbited the equator of the sun. We do not orbit the sun. It's never occurred. No planet has ever orbited the sun. Instead, what occurs is the sun is moving at 72,000 miles per second through space, dragging all the planets in a cone. This is proven just this last time on the Venus transit. And retrograde makes no sense. None of the astrology that Western people throw out makes any sense at all. If we were rotating around the sun on a horizontal plane, we would never ever see the outer planets, except once every 200 years. We would see them for about 34 or 35 days. And it's because of the sun light would totally occlude our ability to see the outer planets if indeed they were further out on the same plane that we are. And so we know that that doesn't occur. And Dr. Bott worked out all the mathematics as to how this all occurs. And this last Venus transit, as every Venus transit does, proves it. Because if you watch Venus as it transits the sun, it does it in this stair-step fashion. Well, that stair-step fashion is a two-dimensional representation on the surface of the sun of Venus spiraling in front of us. And so we can actually work out all of the math there. So if one were to take Vedic astrology and marry it to the mathematics that Dr. Bott worked out, then you would have an extremely accurate system, because you wouldn't be hamstrung by the false idea that we rotate around the orbit of the sun at its equator. That does not occur.
Wow, that's amazing. So we couldn't explain it any better, I will say.
I've done a lot of thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, because obviously I don't have those kind of brains. So what I was thinking logistically is more of a star chart app. It's been more accurate for me. That's what I never believed Western astrology. I wasn't really into astrology. And then when I found Vedic astrology from selling homes, I sold homes to a whole community of Indians, learned the directions of the door, Googled Indian astrology. It was in a book with Vatsu and learning all that. So, and it blew my mind. It was so me. I learned so much from it. And it's, when you take if you look at a star chart app, stick it in the sky, it's real time right now. It says Saturn just entered, Saturn is in Sagittarius, not, Capricorn. It's in Sagittarius in the nakshatra of Mula. These nakshatras are what I really studied. And it's been mind-boggling, just so accurate. It's just been a game changer for me. So good. I'm glad. I was really excited to hear you say that. So,
well, also, they did a study. The French did a study in, I think, from like 68 to 78, 1968 to 1978, and they were able to prove that in the charts of famous athletes and politicians and all these kind of people, they were able to accurately see after the course of these individuals' lives that in fact their natal charts from a Vedic perspective were accurate, especially if they looked at where the moon was.
Yes.
And so the lunar nakshatra really is a very important, although it might seem subtle, it's an extremely important predictive element, should you know what the hell you're doing in it.
Right,
it's very complex, right?
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of the moon, this isn't I just thought about this. What are your thoughts on the moon? Because, you hear all the conspiracies. This is just, do you think the moon is the moon like what we're told?
No. I mean, Western science has lied to us about all of this, plus it's pretty ignorant, okay? Newton was wrong, for instance. Isaac Newton was wrong about how gravity works. We know this mathematically now, yet they're not even addressing that in textbooks yet. They don't bother to even try and educate people. So no, I think the moon is artificial. I think that there's something up there mechanistically adjusting its orbit in order to keep that face towards us. I've looked at the math involved. If it were a natural body, it would eventually rotate so we would see the dark side of the moon at its current rate. That might take about 160 years before the dark side of the moon came back. If it were a natural body, the fact that it has never happened tells me that it's doing adjustments. Plus, we know there's an atmosphere on the moon about 18,000 feet thick. We know that that the gravity is not 1/6 as they calculate. Thus, this is about Newton being wrong on gravity. They've actually done the measurements. It's close to 3/4 of the gravity of Earth. So all different kinds of stuff they've told us about it is quite false. And those people that know about it don't talk about it. It could indeed be housing all kinds of people. Now, if you go back into the Vedic ideas, right? So the Hindu world, the Sanskrit world, is basically split in a couple of different ways. And one of the religion ways that was split was this outgrowth called Jainism. Jain is the name of the religion. There's about 25 million Jain in India. There's a bunch that live here in the US and elsewhere. They're have been a persecuted minority. Their version of religion is very interesting because they don't have personified gods. So it's not like not like Hinduism per se, not polytheism per se. They're actually more akin to the believing and worshiping the pulse kind of an idea, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, one thing that's really cool about Jainism is they've got a really tight cosmology and history. And if you look up the cosmology of Jainism. It goes back and records astrologically accurate positions that go back 200 plus million years. And they talk about civilization back several million years ago, in which there were 600 billion humans living in 2.5 islands of life in this solar system. Those 2.5 islands were Earth, Mars, we think, but the half was the moon. And so the moon was at that point inhabited. There's no reason to suspect it's not still inhabited, just however isolated from us. And something occurred, likely as a result of this great war with those parties unknown, which we probably were not a direct part of, is my thinking at this stage. I don't think that humans were anything more than extras in that particular play where we had the Great War. I think that it was between beings that were far more advanced than us and were in this area and are no longer in this area.
Yeah, wow. So when you say that, and do you think CERN could do something like that? I mean, because I was listening to something you said about CERN and, you know, how it could definitely be an issue coming up. You said this in 2016, but do you think like we could have a catastrophe like that from that? Or do you think that's not?
Oh yeah, they could potentially really screw us over. The reason that I say that that's a potential is because they've got this thing buried in the quartzite rocks of Europe. And
Right.
And they're making more electricity than has ever existed in a natural state on the planet, or for that matter, man-made. And so we're making all this huge amounts of electricity, and we're shoving it into an experiment that is not what we're being told. The humanity does not put that kind of money and effort and everything into doing a theoretical anything, right? We're a very practical species. We don't waste our calories examining things that we couldn't prove or that would be meaningless to 90% of us. So there is indeed some reason that the Large Hadron Collider exists, and that we're not being told what it is. The lie of trying to find subatomic particles is probably shaded towards truth. A little bit of bullshit. Okay, so CERN indeed could cause problems. It may be self-correcting though, all right? In other words, what they're attempting to do, we don't know. We do know for sure though that it involves spin. So let's go back to our little idea here of the little bloop theory where the first hydrogen atom came into reality. Everything that is created in reality, you, myself, the tables, the chairs, you know, the computers, everything in this reality spins continuously, constantly. We are never at rest because all of our atoms, our molecules are continually spinning. And that is just the materium. That's what I call the place where matter exists, the materium. Okay, so it's sort of like the aquarium that our bodies are living in. And the materium here, everything spins continuously. And anything involving energy done well will involve spin that's been designed and regulated and everything. And what CERN appears to be doing, and what they're stated that they're doing, is investigating spin at all these really interesting levels. And if we cross connect the stuff that Bob Lazar was telling us about the power plants in the space alien craft that we shot down in 1947, those power plants are involved in shoving a little tiny particle around a spinning molecule in order to warp space and time. So CERN could, in my opinion, do something really weird and shoot the Earth bazillions of miles away from where we're currently at, because CERN is itself within the whole Earth, and it's generating a giant magnetic field. It actually alters the magnetic field of the Earth when it fires off the electricity inside it. And so it may be affecting a huge chunk of the Earth. Will universe allow CERN to bust up our planet? I don't know. There was a war, and presumably the super Earth, or the giant planet that was the fifth planet in our solar system, was destroyed, and we now have the asteroid belt in its place. So it is possible that such catastrophes can occur. Will they be allowed to do it? I don't know. There's a lot of stuff saying that universe doesn't like anybody, but especially at this point, humans, demonstrably monkeying about with things at this primal level. But basically, CERN's trying to get down to where they can harness the pulse, is their thinking.
Wow. Well, and then another thing. Okay, I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this either, but when I was talking about this, we were talking about the spirit picking thing.
Right.
Um, Definitely put my mind on another level of thinking because I study all these politicians, I study all these people's charts, and there's certain patterns. And Jenny Moonstone, who comes on my channel, she's a big advocate for getting
Oh,
these.
sure. I like her. She's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're gonna talk to Cliff." Blah blah blah. Like, since I was 14. Anyway, but she's a big advocate for that, and we talk about this on my show, and how you brought that up. And do you believe that these people? I know this is if you can go into the reincarnation and people like this becoming sources, and you can briefly, I know, kind of talk about that because I find that fascinating. And do you think like using astrology and tools is magician? Do you think that's like the magician level, and then possibly that can like level your way up the ladder? I don't know even if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. And yes, you're correct on those two last points. It is a tool of the magicians. No magician I know of, and no wizard or warlock of either gender advances without using something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I, as in my own level of activity, I'm extremely aware of all of that. But in this life, it's not anything that's pertinent to me. So in my thinking, I've gone beyond that, and I'm using the source at a different level. And so I can sort of look back and see this, but you're quite correct. These people do that. We know that they're aware of some of the things that I'm telling you. Okay, so for instance, the Spanish Inquisition, all right, a horrid thing to discuss first thing in the morning, right? But the Spanish Inquisition was just part of a whole of a wave of inquisitions that swept over Europe, run by the Catholic Church at the time. And they tortured many, 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 many people. The people they really didn't like, the Templars and other Gnostics, they killed by burning, okay, burning them alive. The reason that they did this, especially women, so thus the thing with the witches in the Salem and our areas here, our guys, I don't think were really cognizant of what they were doing. They were just emulating what their masters in Europe had done. But the idea of burning someone alive is to cause a temporal shock. And the idea is that when you would die and you'd go into your metempsychosis, the mentition that is on the other side of the death barrier, you would be so shocked by having been burned that it actually causes a temporal displacement. And thus, the thinking is here within the materium that by doing that to someone, you kick their ability to reincarnate out some undetermined period of time, because they're going to have to overcome that shock before that consciousness is ready to go back in with another soul and create another life, right? Consciousness is separate from the soul, by the way. The soul is conscious, but not of itself. It's conscious only of its task. But it's not a conscious entity. It doesn't feel things. You can't trade it away or do anything to damage it that way. But the thinking was that they could damage your relationship to your ability to bind with a soul here in the materium by this burning. And there is some suggestion that even the Mayans knew about it and the Egyptians knew about it, and they would do things to cause their enemies to basically reincarnate so far into the future that they couldn't be born and be a problem to you. So, if you go and you look at the books on power, Machiavelli, The Art of War, these kinds of things, they talk about when you have enemies, you have to kill them. If they get back up, they're a potential problem for you. And then the bad guys here that are in the Inquisition business, they took it one step further in saying, we don't want this guy being reborn in the next 400 or 500 years. We want him to kick out several thousand so he's not a pain in the ass to us. And it sort of is decent thinking, although I don't know how mathematically well it worked out for him.
Wow. And do you think that, and I know your reports and you were saying they're going to go down, this is going to go down this year, which I totally believe with my astrology and stuff, that's being awoken, and that's definitely going to be shooken up this year. And I don't know if I said this and explained your reports, but would you mind, just in case somebody is from watching this, what your reports do a little bit? Like a little
Sure. I'll go into it. Basically, what I do is I built an engine, a software engine that takes a dictionary, a lexicon, actually, not a dictionary, because I don't care about the definitions of the word. I just took all the words from the Oxford English Dictionary, and stripped out all the definitions. And then I laboriously, over the number of years, I assigned mathematical values to them around time, because all of our language is about time, whether we're cognizant of that or not. So for instance, just quickly, if you're depressed, it's because you've been thinking about the past, involving yourself in the past, and can't shake the past. If you're anxious, it's because you're thinking about the future, can't shake the future, and you're anticipating something in the future. And if you look at all the words that relate to depression and all the words that relate to anxiety and start building out from there, you get a picture of a bunch of words that are associated with past, a bunch of words that are associated with future, and then a very few words that are associated with the present. And so what my system does is it goes on out, it finds all the words that people are talking about, and it works on a couple of premises. The premise is that all people are psychic. 99% of us don't recognize it at the time it's happening to us, but it's got to come out somehow. So we leak it out in the words we choose to use in our ordinary conversations. So that's premise number one. And premise number two is that we're able to acquire these words by in my system anyway, by doing a scraping of certain websites, many millions of them, and then checking them from week to week to week to see the changes. So basically what I'm doing is I'm looking for what words are being used this week that weren't used in the same conversations last week. And so in a gardening forum or a muffin baking forum, for instance, if I start seeing a lot of words that are associated with future activity, I know that there's some kind of a psychic impression that's trying to leak itself out. And these people in this forum, they're uncomfortable. They're just choosing some word out of their usual range. And the usual range is defined at, let's just say that there's 100,000 words that we've all internalized as English speakers, and that we know we would feel comfortable thinking that we understood what they meant. And but in reality, in our weekly conversations, we're probably restricted to less than 2,500 to say 5,000 maximally, depending on the nature of your job. We just don't use that many different words week to week to week. Gardening discussions usually involve the same subset of words over and over and over and over again, just arranged differently. And it's when we find different words peeking into these usual conversations, that's when I get excited. Those come into my system, and they are prescient in the sense that they bring along with them certain language and nouns and so on that I can then interpret as saying, oh, look, there's enough places around the internet that are saying these words about the future that are future oriented about this subject that I can interpret it as saying, oh, this is likely to occur. And it's a goofy kind of a concept, but it's been refined over 20 plus years, and it can get fairly accurate. Nowadays, it's especially accurate with cryptocurrencies because the cryptocurrency realm is filled with so many new words that don't have any previous existence in English or their underlying language. Thus, their emotional tones are really pristine, and I'm able to pluck them out and refine them within my emotive reduction engine. So I've been very accurate with the cryptocurrencies because all the words are new. And I'm also usually fairly accurate with a lot of slang because the words are new. And we create slang in our teens and our 20s when we're getting that emotional rush of hormones from puberty. And we're absolutely convinced that the way we're feeling can't be how our parents ever felt. And so we need language to express how we feel about things. And so we invent new language continuously. And 90% of all language in terms of the slang falls off in a couple of years, doesn't make it, but there's always some that generation will take with them through their entire lives. And that when you do that, it has a certain emotional tone, and it brings along some subtleties that can be very powerful. So as an example is, the crushing. Okay, so you're crushing it. That's a reasonably good saying from a wide range of non-baby boomers. It was not particularly a slang in our term. In fact, it was one of the terms that came up because we could not possibly understand that as baby boomers because we didn't experience any of those. And so that's held out as one of those few from that generation. And all these words together are taken, I get about 100 million or more reads, I call them, where I'll grab a prescient word and then I try and read 2,000 words around it to bring in everything that's trying to leak out of your psyche. and then I run it through a natural language processor. It presents it to me in a three-dimensional pixelated display of a three-dimensional scatter graph, and I do my best to interpret, basically internet entrails.
Wow. And, I didn't know it was so extensive when we first talked. So, and like, yeah, what I said to you was, this is an astrologer's dream. Why? Because we're taking, as astrologers and people that do this stuff, we're taking things, ancient script, ancient codes, and people are translating them to, what's going on now. And in my opinion, technology changes things. Our lives have changed. We now have tools in this time frame that they had back in the day, where they're translating things on different levels as well. So when I learned astrology, I learned it from actual, like, just trying it out in the business and for my own benefit. That's really what it was for. And it's just amazing to me, like this right here, these reports, if astrologers had this matching these to transits and stuff to modern terms, this is like every astrologer, tarot reader, psychic, whatever you are, you should get these. And you can go to his website. And I'm not just like saying this to sell them. I'm serious. Like, right, yeah. They are really beneficial and will like put your astrology on another level, in my opinion. So it's amazing.
Well, see, when you think about it, if you're reading astrology, you're not really reading astrology 5 minutes ago or 20 minutes ago. You're doing it in the now, in what I call the ever-present now, even though you may be looking forward. So you're very much akin to the tarot readers, the predictive elements that would be using the I Ching or any of these other methods, where the idea is to sample the pulse right this minute, because we're all interconnected by this pulse continuously. And if one could actually refine and see what the pulse was doing, you could get some idea at a dial it in kind of level of what the future is bringing. And we all experience this. We're also psychic that you can tell a half a minute before you're about ready to get into that car wreck. Before there's any visual sign that something's gone wrong, your body tells you that you're about to be in that wreck. And if you're paying attention to yourself, you're basically reading the zeitgeist of the pulse at that millisecond. And so I can see how my reports might benefit, simply because I'm able to provide verbiage that is, as the pulse affects people's minds and kicks out different words ahead of what's going on. And people are incredibly psychic. When I first got the hints of the Banda Aceh earthquake, I was 8 months early on that. Usually the range is not that far out there, but that was early in my process, and it led to a postulate. The postulate was, the larger or the more people involved in the event that is being forecast, the further ahead of it we'll actually start seeing it within the data. So that's when I first started doing differentiation between long-term, short-term, and immediacy data, because I get data that's going to be effective 3 or 4 or 5 days from the time I get it. And usually it's like, it occurred, and it might have affected a few 100,000 people, maybe. But, you get something like Banda Aceh earthquake that affected the whole planet. It comes out 8 months ahead of actually appearing. So, we might be able to see catastrophes. We might be able to sense meteor impacts 20 or 30 or 40 years out, for all I know, if we had the ability to, understand things at an appropriate level.
Wow. So going on the psychic level, in the I know you say that we're basically balls of energy, and we only see like this one sphere of us. We only see this little piece. Even people that see auras only see like this little part. Nobody really sees. And then you said with reincarnation that, and this has always been a fascinating, because I feel like I've lived a multitude of lives. Okay. That's just me. I just feel that. I've always felt that. I was an old soul. I used to say I'm an old soul trapped in a young person's body. I always wanted to hang out with older people, just trying to figure out how to get out of this crazy world with helping people. So with that said, you said that you don't really think that people like remember exactly what they are in a past life. So do you not believe that, how do I say this? Do you not believe that you can do past life hypnosises and then know what you were in a past life?
Correct. I dispute that that's valid. The reason that I dispute that that's valid is because what happens to us in the metempsychoses. Okay. Metempsychoses is the mentition states that occur between lives. It's what you're thinking and doing as consciousness when you're not alive. And we know that some of these states exist because after death, they actually have put wires and stuff on people's brains and done EEGs and all these kind of things. And there's all kinds of activity that occurs long after someone is officially labeled dead, long after they've stopped breathing. And for instance, it's a well-known phenomenon of people coming back from the dead within the first 24 hours as a spirit level to visit their relatives and say goodbye, right? That occurs frequently. It's happened to me a number of times with people I know that have passed. And so this is experiential information that millions of people have, that, oh yeah, so-and-so died and he came and saw me that night and told me everything was cool. All right, so now the reason that we don't remember what's going on is because we have intuition. It would not be an effective system for us to be able to remember past lives and still deal with this life that you happen to be in, your current life. The reason that that occurs is because we know that there's mental conditions that people can get in with damaged brains, aging, any number of things, Alzheimer's, in which the past in this life seems much more real than the ever present now. So there's a lot of people walking around that are in their 60s and 70s where events that happened 30 years ago are much more real to them than what has happened yesterday. And that has to do with their mentation at the moment. Now imagine that situation where you had past lives, where you were remembering what you were doing 3,000 years ago. You wouldn't be able to function in this life. And this has to do with another subset of the brain activity called the DMN. The default mode network. Okay, this is an abstraction that brain scientists and eventually psychiatrists even picked up on it. But the brain scientists say that we operate in the now, except there's a part of our brain that will continuously pull us away from the now. And they called that the default mode network. And this part of our brain fires off many, many times a second. And it tries to get us to think about the future, to be self-examining, to think about the past, apparently anything other than the ever-present now. And this default mode network is the basic operating mode for most people. And so many people are unable to focus on a task for longer than X period of time, and that X period of time is determined by their default mode network and how active it is in their brain. And so it also, if it becomes super active, then you become 100% non-functional. You might become 100% schizophrenic, living forever in a terror between the past and the future. You might become psychopathic, always operating in the future with an aggrandized ego. And all of these are related to the default mode network of the brain. So when you die and you go into the metempsychoses, your soul, which has taken all of it's a template for how your body looks, right? And so I've had the enlightenment experience where I went on out, had the flash of light and was gone for hours and came back and only 10 minutes had passed. And I was drenched in sweat and all of this. And in that process of that enlightenment experience, I saw what was known in the trade, so to speak, as your universal face. And it's a weird kind of a vision where you see yourself, your face on a sphere, if you will, and it stretches out infinitely in any direction you care to look with subtle variations in all of those faces. And basically, I'm seeing all of my past faces. And I was shocked because I look a lot like I do now with some subtle variations. Sometimes I had hair, sometimes I was slightly different, coloration, etc. But fundamentally, I look the same. Now, if you're in your metempsychoses, your soul burns off all of the crud that it got on this life. And that's why we call it hell, because the process is very much akin to burning the residue, the past. It reduces everything from this life to what we call a thick syrupy mass, a single drop. This drop is described in many Vedic yogic literatures as being your intuition. And I agree with that description, that when the soul next reincarnates, it takes that drop from the previous life as its intuition for this life. And so those people with lots of intuition, now intuition, let's define that. Intuition is knowing without thinking, knowing without necessarily having a fact base from which you do know. So in other words, you go to a particular spot. It's possible that, say that you were on a journey, you were following a river, you came to a particular spot on that river, and you could either go from a waterfall. You could either go into the waterfall or go up either side, and you just go one side. You don't apparently even choose, you just go. And so you know that that's the route you need to go. That level of knowledge is intuition. If you felt something, that would be a psychic impression telling you to go one way or another. And that's not intuition. That's more connected with the ever present now. But those people that seem to just plow ahead with particular life choices without even thinking, and that's what everybody says, but you just did it without thinking. And they would say, well, yeah, but I intuited, or I knew intuitively that this was the way to go. It was because they'd had that similar experience in a past life or past lives often enough that it came through into this life's intuition. And so when that thick syrupy mass is boiled down out of the life and taken as your intuitive drop in the next life, that's all you bring from your previous lives. So someone who's going to regress me hypnotically is not ever going to be able to find anything in this mind that actually connects to any of my past lives, right? My intuition brings my past life, not any of the things in my brain. So that's kind of a self-tricking little fallacy. I don't buy it. I could be wrong, but I don't believe that it's factual.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about dreams? Like, do you think that's dreaming?
That's a different situation entirely, okay? And that relates to the nature of how we know who we are. So, for instance, when we go to sleep at night, we actually lose consciousness. Now, the body loses consciousness, all right? We don't lose our consciousness, we are the consciousness. And so when you're dreaming, you're connecting with another state of reality and in your consciousness, and that is bleeding over into your body and your brain, so to speak. So it's not that it originates necessarily within your brain. And then the mechanism could be thought of as this. You may have anxieties or tasks or something that's bothering you in your reality. And it could happen day after day after day after day. And then one night you dream about it all. Like you have one of those nights where you've got a dream and you're just working in that dream. You never seem to resolve it. You're just always coming back to that same point of unresolved whatever. These are things that your mind is basically painting little plays, little pictures around an underlying emotive motivation that you have to deal with at some level. So that indeed, I think, is part of your conscious experience out of the body that goes on every night, and it's being bled back over into your brain because of the connection between your consciousness and your body. It bleeds over. Makes sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, definitely makes sense. It makes sense. And I think the reincarnation thing made sense completely. So when you were saying that basically you're only bringing a little fraction with you, it's this one little, whatever you called it.
Well, the drop is actually of intuition is it's actually huge, because bear in mind, it takes into account all your previous lives from the previous lives from the previous lives, because that intuition is boiled down in each life, and the drop gets more
bigger and bigger, you said.
Yeah, right? Yeah, as you go along. Yeah. And so you get people that are hugely intuitive, and they just know things, and it's just quite shocking.
So do you believe that there's a last life?
I had never considered it. No. I know that the Hindus think about the idea of you have the Brahman that wakes up and then shakes us all into dust and then goes back to sleep to dream us all into existence again. And so we would have a last life in that before the cycle changes. But insofar as I'm aware, so there's a last life, but there's a last life here in this materium as we are. So I think of this as a progression. So each and every life, you get a little bit better. You get a little bit more intuitive, you build up a little more reserves, you get a little bit more brain power, and you're born into more circumstances that are more challenging for you, okay? So we can think of people that rise to great high positions as facing the challenges the universe wants to give them now. And, being wealthy, being celebrities, all of this kind of stuff is a challenge. It's not, it's a blessing and a curse at the same time. And so those challenges we have to go through. We've got to meet those challenges. Now, in one sense, when you progress as a human, you leave Earth and these reincarnations behind. And so in that sense, there must come a point in which you cease incarnating in this particular niche of the materium. You may reincarnate in some other form in another part of universe for more progression and more work, for all I know. But my knowledge doesn't extend that far. But I do know that there seems to be continuation.
Yeah. And what about animals? Do you believe in reincarnation of like different sorts of breeds? Like you'll come back as an animal and stuff? You do?
The progression is that we are all animals at some point. Okay, so it gets really goofy if you want to look at the mechanistic aspect of it. Okay, but you're told in our silly Western sciences that you have 5 senses, and this is not true. You only have 4. So you have, and all of your senses are located in your head. They're all within your cranium. They're all defined by having sense organs. Okay, that is the ultimate definition of a sense. There's a sense organ that provides that sense. So you have eyes, they provide you the sense of sight. You have ears for hearing, nose for smelling, and taste buds for tasting. You don't have a sense organ for feeling, okay, for the sensation of touch. That's anywhere and everywhere within your body. That's actually the body mind receiving impressions from reality. You operate in 3 minds, not to get too obtuse about it, but everybody always operates with body mind, with feeling mind, and with desire mind. And you fluctuate constantly throughout the day among all of these minds. And if I want to put you into body mind, all I've got to do is come along and smash your toe with a hammer. And instantly your feeling mind and your desire mind are thrown out of the realm, and all you can do is think of the pain and be in body mind. So if you want to get a person into feeling mind, you play the music that evokes the responses and so on. It goes to how the vagus nerve controls the organs and connects into the brain and all of this sort of a deal. But within all of this, how do I want to say this? Is this where it gets really, really deep?
I love this. Keep going. Say whatever.
Okay. So within all of, okay, well, now what was your central question again? Sorry, because I started getting up.
The animals.
Yeah. Okay, so your senses, your sense organs are interesting. So for instance, you don't see light. You've never seen light in your life. You could not see light if you tried. Your eyes are in fact a subsystem that presents to you an image. All right. You don't actually see it. You don't feel the eyes feeling the light coming in. You don't feel the eyes processing anything. You have no control over any of that. You're simply presented with a subsystem that delivers you in a completed image. So it's like having a graphics card in a computer that does all the rendering for the screen, and you don't even think about how it does it. It's highly complex and so on. These eyes that we've got, the nostrils, the ears, the taste buds, they don't arise in and of themselves on their own. We grow them for ourselves within our soul in our journey as animals. So we'll start off and, ultimately there's a life spark and theoretically you're some kind of an amoeba or something. And then you jump through many, many, many millions of lives as bacteria until you become an earthworm. And eventually you get to the point where you start growing the sense organs and you become a mammal. Right? And you start growing those things that you'll need as a human through your incarnations until you get to human. And then when your soul incarnates you as human at that time, it brings with you the last set of those sense organs that you were generating as an animal. So you can see some of the sayings within the Hindu stuff, especially in Sanskrit, how they talk about people being born with the eyes of an eagle. And, this kind of thing, right? And it's because they may indeed have been, in that level of being a predator that was eye-based, et cetera, such that they came into this life with really sharp eyes, whereas other people come with sharp hearing or taste or whatever. And it depends on the nature of how we generate. So animals are in essence future humans at some point within their own personal, it's a human in another form, gradually growing through the materium until it can actually become generated as a human.
Wow, that makes sense. Totally makes sense. Gosh, I could ask you questions.
Yeah. That's fine. We can get as goofy as you want. I don't care.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's amazing. Like when you look at things like this, and because this is kind of off the charts subjects, but you explain them in a way, a scientific way that makes sense. So, I mean, what else do you think we should talk about? I'm thinking maybe even I have some questions for you, but we can go through some of those, because somebody asked earlier what happens to the brain with deep meditation. And I'm kind of curious too, because meditation is, in my opinion, I do it differently than most. I'm not going to explain what I do here live on YouTube, but I have a different way of doing things than most do. Okay. So what do you think happens? And I listened to the video that you did about meditation, but if you don't mind sharing.
Sure. A meditation can be thought of as breaking down into basically two different categories: intense contemplation, or what we might think of as energetic or true meditation. True meditation, if you can ever achieve that state, is what shuts down the default mode network in your brain. Okay, true meditation, Zen masters, people that are that practice the hard-edged meditation like that, are incredible at focus. If they had to work on a mathematics problem, they can sit there for 12 hours and focus on that on that problem every single minute of that 12 hours, because they don't have that default mode network part of their brain continuously trying to throw them into the past or make them self-examine or any of these kind of things. The default mode network, by the way, you can think of as kind of like a wonky conscience that's out of control, that has no, and that's the default mode network can also be thought of as the constant little chatter that goes on in your brain. And so meditation can be used to control that, because you can actually disrupt the firing of that default mode network within that part of the brain, and then, so to speak, seize control of your brain and your mind and direct it as you choose. So a lot of people say, well, me personally, that I've got all kinds of energy. And it's like, I don't have much more energy than anybody else, but I don't waste a lot of time with it because I've done a lot of meditation. And so my default mode network is very much broken down and is not so much in control of my life. So that's one aspect of meditation at the hard edged. That's a practical, useful thing to have in this life. But another aspect of it is that if you do that hard edged meditation, and you can get to it from many soft disciplines, but it has I call it hard edged because it has a clean feeling. And in Zen, they say that, you walk the razor's edge, and you know it when you get there, because you'll feel it. That's just all I can say. I mean, I can describe it, but the words would be less than adequate. But in any event, there are other aspects of it. One of the really cool aspects of it is the ability to pack energy, so to speak, to build energy up within your energetic body, such that by the time you actually do end up dying, you've got a reserve of this energy that you can take and use in your metempsychoses. So you can actually take energy from the materium, from the pulse. You can transform it through your body and pack it into your consciousness, so to speak. And then when your consciousness is past the death area, it can use that energy for some period of time. And so you can therefore have more control of the metempsychosis process, the length of time, and all of this. And by the way, just so people don't misunderstand, after you die, you instantly go to heaven. Everybody, okay? No qualifications or anything. Now, true, you're also in
qualifications, nothing?
None whatsoever. The worst possible people go to heaven, the best possible, the mentally deficient, everybody goes to heaven. But you're also going to hell, consequently, and also simultaneously, because your soul is burning off all of the debris from this life that you can't take into the next life. So you're simultaneously in heaven and hell. And the curious part of this is, when you're in heaven, there's no time. So you're there always and forever, which is a weird way to think about it. You've just simply forgotten that you're in heaven at the moment, right? And so some part of you is there as well. And human beings are a lot more complex than we would understand. So much so, we're such grand beings that we can only shove a small part of ourselves into these bodies. And so most of our when we say our higher self or God force or all of that, there is in fact a large percentage of our conscious energy that's not in our bodies. And it's not even really necessarily hanging around us physically. And because this is the case, this explains how we can do all those weird things. Psychic impressions, remote viewing by location. Some people can be, can actually do meditations that provide themselves a physical body copy in another part of the planet. And you can think of that as really easily understood. You're sitting there meditating, and you understand your vibration as the pulse recreates you each and every time. And so what you do is you take a copy of your soul, your body image, and you project that copy to where you want to go. And the next time the pulse comes through, it recreates another body for you over there with your consciousness attached to some degree to that body. And we know that this is a valid phenomenon, often reported through history. And one of the repetitious points of it that points to its validity is that these copies are always less than the original. In other words, a copy of me wouldn't have all of the lines, and it wouldn't necessarily have all of the beard the way it is, and so on. It's a sort of a fudged copy, a little bit blurry or smeared or whatever. It doesn't create the body down to the total degree of stuff here, because it's being held by consciousness at that point. All of these are meditative practices. If you look into the meditations and the various different kinds of them, everything from the yogic through to the Taoist into the Chan, which ultimately became Zen, you find that throughout thousands of years, we have the same set of experiences being reported by people that get into this, and we have the same kind of outcomes and results being reported in different languages under different circumstances, century after century after century after century. And as someone who's done it extensively and with a great deal of focus, I can say that indeed those reports are quite accurate. And thus I know experientially that certain things occur once you get into meditation at a serious level. Now you can also get there, you can get some of these capacities if you are of a particular kind of a personality through the use of psychedelics. And I personally am of the opinion that Putin was wrong. Okay, Putin was saying that the nation that conquers AI will be the dominant nation on the planet for the next century. And I would dispute that. And I would say that the nation that devotes itself to consciousness science, psychedelic science, will be the dominant force on the planet, because they will go far beyond the concept of AI.
And you said AI is kind of like the Big Bang Theory, right?
Correct.
Basically like bullshit is what you said in a way.
It's a dead end. There's no consciousness there. AI can never do anything that was not originally programmed into it by the humans. AI can't write its own code. There's only a single line of a little tiny snip of code that's being executed really, really, really fast. So AI, as we understand it, works the same principle that we think everything is solid. It only works because it's faster than our senses would allow us to normally perceive. And so we think it's actually occurring, but it's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of computer instructions that are being executed in order to make that robot move and blink and say something. But all it can do is move and blink and say what has been put into its instructions. And the idea that AI can be, there's this concept called AGI, which is an artificial general intelligence, which is a AI that's attached to machine learning. Machine learning is just basically shoving all kinds of words into a database and then making assumption about the words you have and then tying them back to reflect back to you. So it's very much a parroting kind of a program. No creativity there. We don't have to worry about AI coming and kicking our ass that way. AI will never know I'm going to unplug the computer and kill it. That sort of a deal, right? So it's not a big. And actually, I think AI and the what we're doing is really cool. I like the idea of smart devices that had accurate, good software in there that can help me do things by eliminating all of the drudgery that is here in the materium. So I love Roomba. I love the little robots that clean up after you, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. All right. So everybody's going crazy in this chat. Like, it's crazy. It's funny. And people are asking, go figure, about Bitcoin. People want to know. I don't know what they want me to ask you. I think some people wrote some comments about, do you think there's going to be crypto debit cards?
Oh, yeah. There are now. I mean, Centra is
about them, he said.
That's because of Centra and 10x and some of these other outfits that are doing the credit cards. And they make a lot of sense because see, here's the thing. They're actually the last connection, and they allow us to have a functioning system as the old dollar system dies. Because if we can get to the point where everybody's got the ability to spend their cryptos via swiping their little card, then we no longer have to worry about the crash of the system. We can replace it as the banks fail. It won't matter that much, and so on. So the point of sale, the payment ability with the cryptocurrency world is, it's like, hooray, hooray, we're there. Once that really gets penetrated into the society and it starts becoming, it'll kick Visa and MasterCard down the road and just destroy them. And we'll, but it also means that we don't have to have times where the gas pumps shut down, where you have to, negotiate with a bit of bacon and some frozen meat in your freezer to try and get some gas or propane or this kind of a deal. We'll have the smooth transition that will allow us to piggyback off of this existing system and go forward into the future.
Interesting. Okay, so somebody that did some super chats here. I don't even know what this means, but asking for a favorite. Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to send this to you. Maybe you can just tell me. He says my cryptos depend on it. I just need a symbol. Anything will do, even a light response will do. Maybe this will get his attention. Yo, hip daddy, what you slinging? Oh my God, these stats are crazy.
So, no, you're gonna have to repeat that. You're gonna have to repeat that.
What is an ANIME? Okay, ANIME. It's like animal.
Oh, anime.
Yeah. So go ahead. Yeah, that's
okay. Anime is just, it's a Japanese form of graphic novels.
Okay.
Big comic books, right?
Clearly, I'm not into that. I don't watch TV. I'm completely out of the times. I look at dates. I look at charts. I look at transits. So, like, when I'm sorry, I'm not knowing these terms. But yeah, there are people that donated to ask these questions.
Well, I'm sorry. I just don't know what they're after in the way of
I don't know.
a symbol or something like that.
Yeah.
And their cryptos depend on it. That's a little weird.
Yeah.
Maybe they've got some kind of a strange, zeitgeist form of trading strategy.
Right. I get.
Well, about that though, I mean, we can just stop for a minute and divert into cryptos here, okay?
Okay.
And just tell everybody that they can just sort of chill out, as I've maintained since November and December of 2016, and all through 2017. We're going to leave 13,880 with Bitcoin sometime in mid-February. Maybe it might shade into the third week of February, but it seems to be closer to the 11th or the 12th. And at that point, we're going to get into another big crocodile tooth forming for all of the cryptos, with all of the stuff we've seen here in the past few months being magnified as we step up. So at the moment, for the next couple of weeks, we're in this little range restricted trading pattern or period. What they call them in the chart world, I don't know. I never did do those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, that would be a good time to buy it, right?
Correct. And unfortunately for Western people, they won't believe me until it really starts taking off, and then they'll be chasing rising prices.
Yeah. I mean, from the charts astrologically, what I've seen too, and plus Joni Petrie, who's a good friend of mine, famous astrologer, well known. She's done shows on my channel. She has predicted. She's done a lot of financial astrology, and so I think with this cryptocurrency, you can really get into this with astrology because things are stamped differently. You have better timings and stuff. So that's what I've really been working on. And it's fascinating because the patterns are in these people's charts that are making big money. They're there. And it's not just, and I'm using the nakshatras, I'm using all this stuff. So it's pretty amazing. All right, let's see if we have any interesting other questions. I don't even know what these things are. The report net glue. Hashgraph.
Oh, Hashgraph. Okay, that was in my last report. Hashgraph is an alternative consensus algorithm to the one that Bitcoin currently uses. And everything, I can just say that, everything that the people say about Hashgraph is true, except at the moment they don't have the network effect, and so they don't have acceptance the way Bitcoin does. So theoretically, Hashgraph is a better gossip consensus algorithm than you find with Bitcoin. And theoretically, it'll work faster. I personally have some concerns that it disincentivizes miners. So I don't know that it'll ever be adopted. The more I think about it, the miners are just not going to make as much money as they would with a standard gossip protocol. So as I say, I don't know that it'll overtake Bitcoin. It may, in that it does have some superior characteristics, but it's a beta versus VHS. It's, MP3 versus any of the AVI programs, et cetera, in terms of standards and protocols. And again, it's technically superior in some ways, but it doesn't have a lot of people rooting for it. So until it does, it's just not going to go anywhere.
Got it. Okay. And then what about ask CLIF about the Ice Age, location, peak, the Antarctic Nazis, how many other sites, goals, the new inland lakes and glaciers, the war on the moon against who? Oh, God.
Oh, all of that stuff, right.
All of it. Real quick,
well,
just real fast.
Right, let's just go through Ice Age stuff. We're in the Ice Age. It's pretty for sure. I don't think anybody will really be denying it by 2022. We'll have had society level changes about growing food, communications, shelter, heating, and all of this kind of stuff by 2022 around the planet relative to the Ice Age. And so now as to where and that kind of stuff, I've got some hints. And unfortunately, it looks like North America is going to get a really big kick again, Ice Age wise. I was thinking this time that it would settle in or start in, so to speak, out of the Caucasus Mountains, but it looks like we're going to get it out of the Appalachians. And it's a weird kind of an effect, okay? There's this kind of weird snow that comes down, and you can look at that snow and you can say it's different than other snow, and it's called New or Nueve Glacier. And it's a particular kind of ice crystals. And there's reports of those 3 years running now in the Appalachians. So it may be that even though they're not very tall, that because of the way glaciers form, that'll be the ridgeback or the center for a new glacial spread that'll go over in the Ohio Valley, head towards the Tetons and the Rockies, and also go down the other side of the Appalachians towards the Atlantic coast. I can still be wrong because we're many years out before that actually really settles in. The last time we had one of these mini ice ages, there were new glaciers that formed all up and down the Andes. They hadn't existed prior to then. New glaciers throughout the Himalayan mountains and so on. So those points of glaciation, I don't expect to pick up new glaciers this time. It just seems to not happen that way. The historical thing is that you'd have a glacial ice sheet over in this particular part of Siberia, and then the next time we had a new ice age, it would actually be in central Russia, and Siberia would be less ice covered and more temperate. Now, why these changes occur is extremely complex, and we need not get into it. But in terms of the peak of it, we're looking at that in like 2065, okay? So a number of years from now, about 60 plus years from now, we're looking at a period of mass or the bulge in a curve. So we'll be right at the top, the peak of the formation of the glaciers and so on. And then for the next 60 plus years, they sort of fade.
Okay. And what about the QAnon?
Oh, QAnon? Sure, yeah. QAnon's cool. Yeah.
The whole mystery thing. I've watched.
Well, see, it's not really. I mean, it's linguistics if you look at it from language. Okay, so this is just a part of my own personal sort of a thing. The language center is not that large in most humans, all right? More of our brain is actually devoted to our eyes, our nose, and our ears and our taste than to cognitive thinking. So most of our brain is actually devoted to our senses, to receiving the input from the sensory system. However, the linguistic center stands apart as an identifiable, easily located chunk of the brain. And we all know where it lives because we can shut up talking to others and it'll still sit there and talk to us inside that particular spot within our feeling of our body. And so linguistics are interesting because they're intimately connected with the psychedelic experience. So those people of the vast majority of the psychedelic users experience a boost in linguistic capacity as a result of a psychedelic experience. It may take a while. You have to reintegrate your personality after the psychedelic experience, and it might be a year after you're done with that you suddenly realize that, oh, you're more articulate, you stumble over your words less, maybe your stutter is gone, the hesitation is gone, these kind of things. Your linguistic center is directly affected. So that I find very interesting and very intriguing. But linguistically, QAnon was very interesting. So I always approach everything from the linguistics, right? Just to start with. And QAnon was rubbished by a guy I like who's a dark journalist, and Dr. Joseph Farrell, right? And they did a recent little video about how they thought that this was prefab. And by that, I'm assuming they mean a put-up job, some kind of a con. All right, and I think that they're making those assumptions about QAnon because they don't understand the language that person is writing in. And again, the indications are, by the way, that QAnon is a single mind. It's not a group that comes together, because the linguistics on a group are entirely different and very easily ascertained. So in fact, I know that John Titor, the reputed time traveler, was a group of people. It was not a single individual that wrote those. They actually collaborated, and multiple minds worked on that. That's not the case with QAnon. QAnon is a mind that has been trained in a particular way of thinking. And that particular way of thinking I used to grow up with, and it was called the military intelligence people. I'm an Army brat, so I was born into that environment, and I lived there until my father retired out of that. And so I was and his position within the military was such that I was very intimately connected with military intelligence. And every year we had a 2-month period of time when we knew our phones were being tapped in order to validate my dad's security clearance and all of this kind of thing. He went so far as to work at the White House and had all kinds of Q level clearances, even into the Pentagon, right? And this was in the Vietnam War period. He was a military governor at Pleiku, so he was really connected with that deep state kind of world, right? And so I'm very familiar with how these people talk. And QAnon is an individual that has been trained in thinking in analyses the way the military does it. And thus it altered that person's expressions, and they took advantage of that alteration in how he expresses things. So it's not prefab the way that Joseph Farrell would have you understand it. QAnon is simply speaking. I think probably that individual has got 20 plus, 30 plus years thinking that way, and now probably could not express themselves more in any other way effectively. And so when a QAnon does speak, he's doing it as though he's talking to his peers and what I would think of as Kohai, the new recruits, the younger people that aren't quite as savvy, where you may have to spell out a few things to them and you can't use the real encoded stuff. But of all of the QAnon analyses that I've seen, I think Tracy Bean's does pretty much the best, the most self-regulating, self-judgmental approach to analyzing it, where she's always questioning her own conclusions. Many of the other people make conclusions and then run with it without ever questioning whether that conclusion was valid. I like Tracy because she does that, but even she misses a lot of the military speak, okay, the mil spec, the sit rep kind of thing, where there's just this incredibly dense contraction of information that's put into there. You have to understand that at some level, military guys would think of, they would express themselves very much like that particular episode of Star Trek with Picard, where Picard goes to a planet with this, he's sucked down to this planet with this other guy from another race that they couldn't understand each other because the other race spoke in metaphor. So they didn't have declarative sentence. So it was always like Picard and so at Agora, or whatever the planet's name was. And that was all you needed to say to those individuals to encapsulate the whole thing. So it's very much like us being able to say, oh, this is just like Independence Day. All right. So I would say just like Independence Day, meaning the movie, and you'd get this whole flood of impressions. And so I'm speaking in a metaphoric level that delivers far more than just those few words would do in a declarative way. That's what we're running into with QAnon. So QAnon uses a lot of numerics and other cryptic things that many people are interpreting accurately at one level, but what they're missing is the metaphor that is brought along that is brought along by that statement. But I think QAnon is legit. I think QAnon is very tightly connected. and is serving a purpose. Okay, so this is going to sound really goofy, but we got to talk about Robert Heinlein, the science fiction writer. He wrote this book called The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, about it's a science fiction book about people mining on the moon. All these people go up there to mine the moon, and over the years you get a whole civilization that's living inside the moon, and they're basically slaves of Earth. And at one point they decide to revolt, and the deep state also has agents on the moon that try and stop the revolt of all the miners. And within the main story of The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which is basically all about the moon revolting against Earth and becoming self-governing, within there was a character which was this poet. And throughout the Moon is a Harsh Mistress story, the poet, not a huge character in relative to the other characters there, but it was a central expositor, always foreshadowing, telling you what was going to happen. This poet was leaking out information. It was the way in which the cognoscenti, the knowledgeable people of the revolution, were being told what's going on within the revolution, because they learned to read what the poet's ramblings and read the underlying between the words, between the lines, as we would say. And that's QAnon's function in this particular stage of things, because we're right at a very delicate position now. Because we've got so many people that would revolt, would literally take to the streets because of the criminality, the breakdown of law and order, the fake money system we've got to deal with, the constant petty fascism that you find everywhere, all of these kind of things, or the social order breaking down as the dollar empire dies. And under these circumstances, if we're at the point of a powder keg and it's too early, it would be inappropriate, and it's not necessary, one way to diffuse that would be to introduce a QAnon kind of character, the poet for the revolution, the one who presays everything and says it at a metaphysical level. So it's not like it's really actionable, but it's not, as Farrell would have you understand it, Dr. Farrell would have you understand QAnon as being a staged op, simply because you're not required to do anything. You know, he's going to provide you the answers. And I dispute that. QAnon's function is to cause motivation, is to cause you to do something, which is to educate yourself. And so the very last stage of a revolution is where the revolution becomes visible to the populace on the street. So having lived in a military environment with a father who plotted revolutions and counter coups and all of that kind of thing, I know how this thing works. It's like an iceberg. By the time the public sees the little tiny bit of the iceberg that's sticking up out of the water in the harbor, the rest of it is fully formed and they're blocking the harbor and all ready to go. And so just at that point, the whole iceberg tips over and you're seeing this giant kind of a thing appear in front of you. And it helps to have a few days warning that this is going to occur, so it doesn't totally shock you. And that's really QAnon's function, in my way of thinking, is that individual is letting out information to get us ready, because this stuff is going to happen, and it's going to be fundamentally shocking. So we have that in my data. And in fact, there were two words that kept showing up for 2018, squeeze and shock. And the squeeze part we're seeing all over at various different metaphoric levels, everything from the squeezing on the dollar to the squeezing on all the pedophiles to the squeezing on the political system to the pressurization of everything. But we're also seeing the shocks start popping out. And it's going to be one hell of a year in that regard. And so that's really what QAnon is about. I can go into the individual QAnon stuff that I've read, and if you wanted, it gets quite detailed. I think that there's a whole lot that people have missed because they were misinterpreting things like the word delta was frequently misinterpreted to mean delta force. And what QAnon was talking about was delta as a Greek letter meaning the difference between two areas. And so if you read QAnon a particular way, you get one message. And if you read it another way, you get a more comic book kind of understanding of what's happening.
All right. And, I definitely have, and this is a good question. I think this will be one of the last, about North Korea with this new SpaceX, because I heard that on Alex Jones prior, and they were saying that there's a payload on it that, do you have any advice or any information on that, what that could happen with that?
Our data sets are, okay, I think it's accurate. Many of the things that are being reported about the SpaceX. We do have pretty solid evidence now that the directed energy weapons are really functional. Okay. These directed energy weapons are kind of like ray guns. And so our data sets would suggest that war in North Korea will be a Chinese affair, and that it'll be kept at a very low, primitive kind of a level, and that China is not inclined to tolerate the sudden bursting into a sci-fi world with U.S. airplanes flying over with directed energy weapons that, burn giant swaths of North Korea 30 and 50 miles wide as far as they fly, that kind of thing. China just is not prepared to deal with the aftermath of that, doesn't want it, has some other stuff going on at the moment. And so our data sets continually point to China being preemptive, something they're not prone to do. That's why it was so interesting to see that within our data sets. Governments are usually reactive, and the Chinese government has to move so many people and manage such a huge mass that they're the slowest acting. They think very fast. They think far into the future. So they're going to sit there and think about everything from G through to Z. And then when they finally act, they'll do Z. They don't have to do any of the intervening steps because they've really thought about it. So they appear to be very fast acting in that regard. And I think they've been discussing and thinking about North Korea for a long time, and that they're going to make a preemptive move. And that's just what the data would seem to suggest, that it goes up to a certain point of tension, and then China decides, okay, that's it. So much for you. And they deal with it. They still are going to have problems, but there'll be far fewer problems than if there's some kind of a high energy war between the US and North Korea. Again, my data sets would tend to suggest that we're going to see this post-March. So it would happen after March, sometime in Northern Hemisphere spring. We're going to get those tensions at their most elevated level. And perhaps if you could do, Vedic astrology on groups as a whole, you might find out when in March, April, or May this is most likely to go down. Data sets would tend to suggest this sort of thing happens over the course of a couple of months, and we're sort of dealing with it in May still, but it may have initiated a little bit earlier. And that's really all I've got. It's just interesting about the SpaceX and how a lot of this is now taken out of the officialdom categories. So, a private company can be as opaque about stuff as they want. They could say, oh yeah, we're taking up, that satellite to look at X-rays, and they can lie to your face because there's no recompense, no consequences for them. They're not theoretically bound to tell the public the truth here, or to say that it's classified and we can't tell you, which is in of itself a kind of something in terms of solid information.
Yeah. Well, and the last thing this is for me, I guess. So clearly I'm a Trump supporter. And do you feel like he's going to drain the swamp like he says he's going to do, and he has good intentions this year, and he's going to get things done like that? Draining the swamp meaning like cleaning house with all these sick people? Sure.
Actually, I think that's happening right now. And I think that people mischaracterize the situation. Okay, so I always hearken back to this guy known as King Wen. He was a Chinese emperor. So he was Emperor Wen, W-E-N. And when he was crowned emperor, he took over under interesting circumstances where the Chinese deep state had killed off a couple of previous guys and was deciding who got to be emperor and who didn't, based on, how malleable they might be. And so King Wen, he gets made emperor of China. And he realizes that the deep state of China has got him boxed in, and that if he makes one wrong move, he's screwed. They'll kill him, replace him with his first cousin. And so what he did was he went crazy. And so King Wen, his reign as emperor of China was characterized by the first, I think, 15 years of him basically being known throughout China as a raving lunatic that was emperor only nominally and notionally in everybody's mind, but in fact didn't really wield any kind of power. However, over those 15 years, King Wen, who was anything but crazy, was able to put in replace various different people because there were certain things that he would take advantage of, and he gradually built up power. It was not, as many of the historians would say, that he came out of madness and turned out to be a brilliant statesman and tactician and all of this. He was always that, in my opinion. He was just hamstrung by circumstances and had to appear crazy just to stay alive. Because if he was a crazy man, it didn't matter what he did. If the deep state decided he was crazy and let the word out that he was crazy, then his actions as a crazy man would assume to be crazy and not some part of a method in his madness. And this was a man who did just that. And so I think that's a very good historical analogy to where we're at the moment.
Yeah, that's good.
So, but this year is the beginning of it. It's not the end. Okay, yeah. We'll still be dealing with that 2 years out, and it's going to be just huge. I mean, you got the Harvey Weinstein kind of stuff, and right now they're talking about Oprah Winfrey being able to run, and it's like,
what are your thoughts on that? Is that possible?
Yeah, sure, she might do it, but I'm curious as to how the questions are going to be answered when they say you were a procuress, you were a pimp for Harvey. You know, you supplied women to Harvey Weinstein to be raped. And you supplied all these people with these connections, and you participated in the pedophilia network at that level, at least. And so how is she going to be able to answer that? Plus, there's this other weirdness in the data sets, okay? So our data sets will pop up some stuff that seems just hugely outlandish, just totally beyond the pale. Mm-hmm. And those things I really pay attention to because sometimes they're very, very, very accurate. Right. And I've got one that's cohesive now, and it's called about, I'm calling it truth in presentation, okay? And it's coming about as a, and it would say, these data sets could be interpreted to say that when the debates come, presidential debates come for 2020, nobody will be allowed to wear makeup or wigs or contacts or anything that would obscure their presentation. The reason being that, you know, now they're saying that Hillary Clinton used contacts and glasses that were part of a system that fed her answers. Okay, so you can't trust these devices at one level. And it's going to go to the point where they're going to say, no, you can't appear and have a wig. You can't wear a wig into a presidential debate because you could have subcutaneous kind of wires that were glued, or wires glued into your head that would feed sound to your bones, and you could get feedback and help in ways that we couldn't detect. So if you're going to come to this debate, you've got to come there, you know, au naturel. And you're not exactly, and you're not even going to have. And so would Oprah Winfrey run without her wigs? Would she run without her makeup? Could she stand to be seen that way? And this is part of a general society level backlash that's going to occur as a result of a lot of it's basically the fake news thing being taken to the extreme. We'll know I'm correct because there's a temporal marker along the way. When my data sets pop up the data, they say this precursor language will appear, then this precursor language, and then this precursor language, and then the event you're talking about. And so some of my temporal markers, one of them is a lawsuit that will exist about, and it will sue the mainstream media for consumer fraud. Now, I'm just putting it in those terms, but we may see a class action suit. I don't know that it has to be a class action suit, but I would think that that's more probable than not against the mainstream media for lying. And for, you know, if that appears, regardless of how the suit is settled, whether it's thrown out or not, it is a temporal marker on this path leading to this truth in presentation movement that rolls through the social order. And it's kind of a backlash to political correctness. And so it's basically saying to everybody, if you want to be 100% politically correct and you're a female candidate, then take off the makeup. That's a fraud. Take off the wig. That's a fraud. You know, that kind of thing, right? And the same thing applies to males. You can't use makeup like, Kennedy did. You have to be like Nixon without makeup in the debate and all of these kind of things. And yeah, we know you're going to not look as good as you would with the makeup, and that doesn't matter. That's not part of this. What's part of this is being factual and 100% about it. So we're going to have this, the way humans are, the pendulum swings always too far each way, right? To gradually start settling out. And so we have yet to swing back in the backlash against the political correctness and the identity politics and all of that. But when it does, it'll get to that level. And one of the temporal markers, like I say, will be this lawsuit, which should appear in 2018. So once that happens, then I'll be able to say, hey, we're on this path, and look, the next temporal marker is this, and so on.
Wonder if you could get people's birth times with this software.
I don't do
God.
yeah. And see, I don't do personal things anymore because of the reasons I've explained in the past, right? Also, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
God, if I could have everybody's birth time that's like in the media, it would just be amazing. Because you can't really do anything without times, you know?
Right, right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
no, I say it's so too broad. Yeah.
yeah. And with Indian astrology, if I don't know somebody's time, what you can do is you can take their chart and read them by the moon. So, and you know, that's why Indian astrology is so moon based. So you can basically take the moon, make the ascendant and read the chart. And it does work. I learned that from Joni Patri, but there's I mean, to actually know when something logistically is going to happen, you really do need the time. So,
And
I
also
don't,
place.
yeah,
It
and
really helps for place. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I've taken up enough of your time. Thank you so much. There's so many people watching, and I hope everybody goes to Cliff's website. I'm sure you're already part of his crew, and thanks for joining us over here. But Cliff, I'm just gonna say bye to you, so don't hang up. I'm just gonna end this. And thanks everybody for watching.